Welcome to our 9th lesson this quarter. Today we are in Revelation, the 5th chapter, and I'll read for you the first 10 verses, and then we'll talk about them. Then I saw in the right hand of the one seated on the throne a scroll written on the inside and on the back, sealed with 7 seals. And I saw a mighty angel proclaiming with a loud voice, "Who is worthy to open the scroll and break its seals?" And no one in heaven or on earth or under the earth was able to open the scroll or to look into it. And I began to weep bitterly, because no one was found worthy to open the scroll or to look into it. Then one of the elders said to me, "Do not weep. See, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the Root of David, has conquered, so that he can open the scroll and its 7 seals." Then I saw between the throne and the 4 living creatures, and among the elders, a lamb standing as if it had been slaughtered, having 7 horns and 7 eyes, which are the 7 spirits of God sent out into all the earth. He went and took the scroll from the right hand of the one who was seated on the throne. When he had taken the scroll, the 4 living creatures and the 24 elders fell before the Lamb, each holding a harp and golden bowls full of incense, which are the prayers of the saints. They sing a new song. "You are worthy to take the scroll and to open its seals. For you were slaughtered, and by your blood you ransomed for God saints from every tribe and language and people and nation. You have made them to be a kingdom and priests, serving God, and they will reign on earth." Well, that's self-explanatory, right? We don't need to go any further. No, that's not, of course. Revelation is complex and difficult. A number of years ago, I had the opportunity to be in Romania to teach Romanian church leaders a Bible. And the task I was given was to teach them the Psalms. And so we spent a week in this intensive course where we spent many, many hours each day looking at the Psalms and studying the Psalms. And I was teaching them. And at the very end of the week, with just 3 or 4 minutes left in class, I asked whether any final questions, anything you don't understand, any last questions you might have. One guy raises his hand and he says, "I've never understood the book of Revelation." I had to laugh and say, well, we've been doing the Psalms all week long. We haven't even scratched the Psalms. There's no way in 2 or 3 minutes I can do everything you need to know about Revelation. I couldn't even do that with multiple hours or weeks. But I did say, when you read Revelation, here's what you need to be looking for. Revelation should be comforting to us no matter what condition we find ourselves in or what situation we find ourselves in, because Revelation tells us that God has a plan and that God is ultimately going to redeem us, and God is ultimately going to redeem all of creation. And so we can move forward in our lives with confidence because of that. Well, we also don't have time in a single Bible study to fully understand Revelation. And one of the worst things that we could do when studying this complex book is just to take 10 verses like I just did, completely out of context, and then try to figure out what they're trying to say to us. We need to know a good bit about the context and the purpose for which it was written. John is the author of Revelation, as you may know. We do not know if he is John the evangelist who wrote the gospel or John who wrote the letters. They may all be the same person. They may be 3 different people. We really aren't completely sure. But nevertheless, this John finds himself in the crosshairs of the great Roman Empire. And I think it's somewhat odd that the great and powerful Roman Empire feels threatened by the fairly small and really politically weak church. But they do. And part of the threat is that Christians just won't bow their necks to the empire. You are required in the Roman Empire to say that Caesar is Lord. And what do Christians say? Christ is Lord. Jesus Christ is Lord. That was a political statement they were making, refusing to say that Caesar was Lord, that Caesar was the Son of God, another title that Caesar took for himself, but rather that Jesus is the Son of God. They believed deeply in a mighty, almost unseen power that was more powerful than Rome, and that kind of freaked out the Roman authorities, and they weren't quite sure what to do with them. And so this dissident John is exiled to the island of Patmos, this tiny little island out off the coast of Ephesus, kind of out there in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea. And back on the mainland, there are churches, 7 churches in particular that John is writing to, that are struggling to live faithfully in those difficult times. And some were doing better than others, but they all were struggling, and some were even failing. And so one Sunday morning, John is there on Patmos, and he's granted this vision, this revelation. And it's a revelation that challenges both the church, those 7 churches, but also our church, our churches, and it also challenges the empire. A book came out recently, Revelation for the Rest of Us by Scott McKnight. And part of what he says in there, I think is pretty powerful. He says, in the book of Revelation, John instructs the 7 churches of Western Asia Minor on how to live as Christian dissidents in an empire racked by violence, power, exploitation, and arrogance. Follow the way of the Lamb, thumps the drumbeat of this book. Yet many discussions of Revelation completely miss this key message. Michael Gorman is right. Revelation is not about a rapture out of this world, but about faithful discipleship in this world. This is one of the keys to reading Revelation well, that we understand the dual critique of the church and the empire. Reading Revelation well requires recognizing that Revelation has much to say. It makes no sense until we first see how it speaks a powerful encouragement to be a dissident disciple. And the first step in understanding this is learning to use our imagination. And chapter 5 immediately asks us to use our imagination. John is in the heavenly throne room. God is seated on the throne, but John doesn't give us much description of God. But as the 5th chapter opens, John notices that in his right hand, God is holding a scroll, and it is sealed with 7 seals. N.T. Wright tells us to imagine that this is kind of like an architect's plan for a building, or maybe a general's plan for a battle, but it's all sealed up. And so as long as it's sealed up, nobody knows how to execute those plans. Another scholar suggested that in ancient Rome, a will would be sealed with 7 seals so that it would remain sealed during the lifetime of the person. But when the person dies and the seals are opened up, then the heirs are able to execute the will and receive their inheritance. And so there's a sense in which the inheritance that God is offering to us is the redemption of the world. The plans, the architectural plans there, are for the redemption of the world. And so John hears this loud voice asking, well, who is worthy to open this scroll up? And no one on the earth or above the earth or under the earth is found worthy. And John begins to weep, because if no one can open up the plans can't be executed. Another way of looking at it, like you just mentioned, we can't receive our inheritance if no one is worthy to open the scroll. My wife and I are fairly recent empty nesters, and we from time to time get a letter that comes to address to our children to the house. That's some kind of an official letter from the Department of Motor Vehicles or the Clerk of Court or whatever, some kind of a letter. And we usually call them and say, do you want me to open this and tell you what's in it, read it to you, or do you want me to mail it to you, or what? We don't feel like we have the authority just to open it ourselves. It's not addressed to us. It's an official document, and at best, I suppose, it would be unethical to open it, and at worst, it could even be a crime to unopen it. And it's not so much that we aren't worthy to unopen it, but we're not authorized to. And there's a sense in which John here says no one, not only is no one authorized, but no one is worthy to be able to open that. He begins to pray, but then, as he begins to weep, one of the 24 elders that surround the throne, and the 24 elders likely symbolize the 12 tribes of Israel and the 12 apostles. One of those elders tells John, don't weep, but look to the Lion of Judah who can open the scroll. And so then John looks, I suppose, to where the elder is referring, and it is not a lion, but it's a lamb standing there kind of in between the 4 creatures and the 24 elders there next to the throne. And the lamb takes the scroll from the hand of God. And the 4 creatures, and they likely are symbolizing all of creation. See, all of creation is involved in redemption, not just humanity, but all of creation. So that's probably what the 4 creatures symbolize. And then all the 24 elders, they immediately fall down before the Lamb. And the elders each have a harp and a bowl of incense. And in that bowl of incense is the prayers of the faithful. And we talked about that a few weeks ago, but I just love that image. Our prayers are in these bowls, and they are brought before God, and they are purified, and then God's will is done on earth as it is in heaven. But our prayers are there in that bowl. And then they sing a song declaring the worthiness of the Lamb, because he was slaughtered in order to save saints from every tribe and language and people and nation. His sacrifice essentially transforms them and us into unworthy servants to priests, royal priests, a kingdom of priests. Let's dig a little bit deeper. John is not merely telling us what he sees in these visions. He's actually just, I don't know a better word than just impregnating this entire book with allusions to the Old Testament, to the Scriptures. His Scriptures would have been only the Old Testament, of course. And it's almost as if every verse has multiple references to the Old Testament. There are 404 verses in Revelation and over 800 quotes or allusions to the Old Testament in the book. And it really is testimony to the biblical literacy of all of the people who would have been in those 7 churches, because they would have picked up on all of these references. And it's an indictment on us that we miss most of them. I dare say we catch very, very few of the Old Testament references that are in there. And missing the references means that we're missing the meaning, of course, as well. Let me just give you an example. Just that first verse in the passage where John sees God holding the scroll there, and it's sealed with the 7 seals. That refers to at least 3 different books of the Bible. Ezekiel 2:9 says, "And when I looked, behold, a hand was stretched out to me, and behold, a scroll of a book was in it." And that passage goes on to talk about there's writing on both sides of the scroll, which is exactly what it says in Revelation as well. Then in Daniel 12:4, "But you, Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book until the time of the end." And so here we again have this idea of the words all shut up in this book or in this scroll, sealed until the end, which is what's going on in Revelation. And then finally in Isaiah 29:11, "The vision of all of this has become for you like the words of a sealed document. If it is given to those who can read with the command, 'Read this,' they say, 'We cannot, for it is sealed.'" And so there is when it's asked, who is worthy, and no one is found to be worthy. We can't read it. It's not sealed. Well, all of those allusions the early readers likely would have been aware of, and we just blow right by them and don't hear them. But I want to pay particular attention to the allusion and to the symbolism of the Lion of Judah and the Lamb that was slain. Now you may remember in Matthew when King Herod asked his advisors where the Messiah is going to be born, they quote from Micah 6, and they say, "And you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah. For from you shall come a ruler who is to shepherd my people Israel." And then later in Micah 6, Judah is described as a lion who will conquer evil. And so right there in Matthew, quoting back Micah, we have this idea of Judah being a lion that will conquer. We also, in Genesis 49, Judah is described as a lion that is going to go out and conquer evil. And so the Lion of Judah is this powerful conquering force that's going to do away with evil. But when John sees the lion standing next to the throne, how does he describe it? "I saw a lamb looking as if it had been slaughtered. And the lamb had 7 horns and 7 eyes. And the 7 eyes were the 7 spirits of God going out into all the world." Well, now 7, you probably know, is a complete number. Anytime we encounter 7 in the Scriptures, it's talking about completeness. 7 days makes a complete week. And so this is a symbolism for the lion, or the lamb, who is the lion. First being omnipotent, having all power. That's the 7 horns. And the 7 horns symbolize God's power, going all the way back to the story of the Battle of Jericho. And 7 priests took 7 horns and they blew them and marched around Jericho 7 times, and then the walls came down. God's power is manifest in those 7 horns, and God's power is very different than earthly power. They don't battle Jericho with bows and arrows and spears and swords and those things. It's with the horns, and that's what causes the walls to fall down. God's power is different, of course. So the Lamb has all power, 7 horns. The Lamb also has 7 eyes. The Lamb is omniscient. The Lamb can see everything. And the 7 eyes are the 7 spirits, and that's likely the symbolism of the Holy Spirit, who is not only seeing everywhere, but is everywhere. So the 7 eyes have gone out all throughout the earth. there's a passage in Zechariah 4:10 that talks about 7 eyes on a stone, and it says, "These 7 are the eyes of the Lord, which range through the whole earth." And so the Lamb is omnipotent, is omniscient, and is omnipresent, is all-powerful, all-seeing, and is everywhere. But yet, this all-powerful, all-seeing, all-present Lamb has been slaughtered. And when the elders sing the song of praise, they praise the Lamb for being slaughtered in order to save the people. And we might ask, well, what happened to the conquering Lion of Judah? I mean, our Savior, we'd rather be the Lion of Judah than a lamb that gets slaughtered, right? Well, the illusion of lamb, of course, should take us back to the Passover, and that's one of the illusions that we can get. We maybe don't have to have a lot of help in that. And you'll remember that you have these powerless Jewish slaves who are under the thumb of the powerful Egyptian Pharaoh. And yet, when the slaves sacrifice a lamb and put the blood of the lamb on the doorpost, the death angel passes over them but does not pass over Pharaoh's house. And Pharaoh discovers that there is a power much greater than he in the world. And after this happens, he agrees to allow the Hebrews to leave because he's so afraid. He's come to this new realization, this new power. But it took a lamb being slaughtered for them to achieve that victory. And so likewise, John is writing to a powerless church, at least in terms of legally powerless or politically powerless, being persecuted by a very powerful political empire. And the tools for resistance that they're going to have are not going to be the tools of a lion. They're not going to resist Rome by going to battle with Rome with brute force and strength, but rather they're going to be the tools of God's Lamb, being slaughtered and seemingly defeated, only to be raised by the power of God that is beneath all, that no one realizes is even there, from death into power and into glory. Well, let's think a little bit about the witness of the church and how this might apply to us today as we move towards an application. And I want to go back to Scott McKnight's book that I quoted above, and he quoted someone saying that Revelation is not about a rapture out of this world, but about faithful discipleship in this world. Not unlike perhaps what I told the leader in Romania. It helps us to have encouragement to know that we can live our lives the way God wants us to live them and is asking us to live them, because we know that ultimately God is going to reign and God is going to be redemption to everything. But it matters to how we behave and act right now. And so John is challenging those 7 churches and challenging us to put our faith and our trust in Jesus above all, above arms, above our own strength, above our own intelligence. Above all, we trust Jesus, and we do what Jesus says, even when it doesn't seem to make sense, because we are the servants of the Lamb. We also recognize that we are called to be dissidents, to confront evil empires wherever they may exist, and that may be some political evil empire, or it may be some other force, but anything that would oppress, anything that would harm other people, anything that causes other people to be in need, we have to find ways to go to war with those, if you will, to be dissidents. But the war that we will wage will look very different. It'll be the war of the Lamb, not the war of the lion. We confront the evil powers with the fruit of the Spirit, the gifts of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Let me tell you a story from church history about how that happened at least once. On Saturday, June 22nd of 1940 is when France finally surrendered to Nazi Germany and became completely underneath the power of Nazi Germany. And the very next morning, Sunday morning, Andre Trocmé, who was the pastor of a little Huguenot church in the little French town of Les Chambon, preached a sermon in which he told his congregation that they had a duty to resist the violence of the Nazis. And yet he said that they had to do it via the weapons of the Spirit. And the weapons of the Spirit were just those that I mentioned a moment ago, the fruit of the Spirit, the weapons of love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, and self-control. Those are the weapons that we use against guns and tanks and evil of the Nazis. You may think, well, how in the world do we do that? Well, think again. Little Les Chambon is a tiny little town in France. They have no arms. Andrew Trocmé is just a pastor of a tiny little church. He has no power. And yet what he said was, we need to organize, and we need to know at that time Jews were fleeing Germany, and they'd fled into France, and now they're trying to get out of France into neutral Switzerland. And Les Chambon was not far from Switzerland. As a Trocmé said, we have to find ways to hide Jews and then to smuggle them across the border into Switzerland. And he did. He organized the town and the surrounding farms, and I think it was about 13 other villages. And they found incredibly creative ways to do that. They had a boarding school, and so they just brought all these Jewish children and put them in the boarding school and made them pretend, or had them pretend like they were Protestant children in the boarding school. And they developed all these codes. And so if one person had a Jewish family maybe in their house and didn't have room, but knew that someone else is coming through town, they might go to their neighbor and say, I have an extra Old Testament. Could I give you my extra Old Testament? And the friend might say, yes, of course, there's room. I'll be happy to take the extra Old Testament. And by the end of the war, they didn't keep track. That wasn't the point. And they don't really know, but they probably saved upwards of 5,000 Jewish people. Some of the children were there the whole war and just were there incognito, but kind of there in plain sight and yet hiding. And then many, many others, of course, made their way through the town and made their way to Switzerland and to safety. And all of that was done using the weapons of the Spirit. Trocmé trusted that God was more powerful than the Nazis, but that God's power is a different kind of power, and that rather than trying to take up arms, which would have been a futile effort for him, he took up the weapons of the Spirit. And I think that's exactly the sort of encouragement that God is giving us through Revelation, particularly when we feel like that we are too weak to do anything, when we feel like I can't make a difference, I can't affect real change. God's only saying, I want you to do what you can in the way that I do things. We are followers of the Lamb in the way that Jesus did things, and if you do that, my power will be made perfect in your weakness, as God told Paul, and Paul wrote in the book of Romans. Well, how might we apply that maybe a little more directly to our lives? We don't live currently in the horrible conditions that the 7 churches were living in back when John wrote Revelation, and we aren't living in the horrible conditions that Andrew Trocmé and the church and the town of Les Chambon, France was living through in the 1940s. But we do live in a world that's full of terrible and evil power, and you only need to open up the newspaper to see how that happens. And God is calling each one of us and our churches to be dissidents in the face of evil. And we're to use the weapons of the Spirit, and that will test our faithfulness. That's why John comes down so hard on some of those 7 churches who are losing their faith and letting go of love and this kind of thing. It's going to test our faithfulness, and we have to double down and make sure that we are faithful and true to Christ. The power of evil often seems to be so much greater than the power of good. But as we talked in our last lesson, an eclipse of the moon is a tiny little moon moving in front of the great sun, and yet the sun is so much more powerful. The God's love and power is so much more than the small power of evil, even when it doesn't seem that way. And I may have shared this with you before, but one of my favorite ways that I understand how the power of good, even though it seems sometimes less than evil, is so much more powerful than evil, I learned in the Grand Canyon. Back in 2006, I did kind of a life-changing 5-day backpacking trip in the Grand Canyon. And because I'm kind of a nerd, I read 18 books on the Grand Canyon before I went to the Grand Canyon. I read books about the flora and the fauna, the plants and the animals in the Grand Canyon. I read books about the human history of the Grand Canyon. There was this encyclopedia of every recorded death that has happened in the Grand Canyon, and I read that. And the books I enjoyed the most, oddly enough, were the books about the geology of the Grand Canyon. And you can, as you're walking down the Grand Canyon, you're walking down through all of the different strata of all the different rocks that have ever been on the earth. And the way the Grand Canyon was formed, of course, was by the Colorado River cutting through those rocks. And what is going on there is there's 2 tectonic plates, and one plate is pushing the other one up, which is why California has all the earthquakes as well. And as it gets pushed up, the Colorado River is cutting down. And the Colorado River has cut through every kind of rock there is on Earth. I want you to think for a minute about water and rock. Rock feels so solid, rock feels so powerful and strong, and water just feels kind of weak. I mean, we even say, I feel weak as water. And yet through all of those millennia, the water has been cutting through the Grand Canyon, cutting through all of those rocks. And it still does. It's this gentle force, but the gentle force is wiping away, wearing away, washing away the power of the rock. So if evil is the rock, and evil feels like that it is so powerful, and evil gets pushed up into us, and just like it does in the Grand Canyon, the ironic thing is the more that land gets lifted up, the more the Colorado River cuts, because it rushes faster downhill. And so the more evil resists, actually, the more the Colorado River can do its work. And not only has the Colorado River cut through all of that rock, but it has created something that is incredibly gorgeous, just breathtakingly beautiful and graceful. And that is the power of the weapons of the Spirit. When we employ against the powers of evil love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, and self-control, what we know is, even though it doesn't seem to be working and it seems to be so gentle, it is wearing against those things, and we are being the dissidents for Christ that we are called to be, and we are fulfilling the mandate that we get in Revelation. Rosalind Carter said, "Do what you can to show you care about other people, and you will make our world a better place." As surprising as that may sound, that is a good bit of the message of Revelation and our challenge for today.